in the region. The situation continues to be extremely complicated in terms of security. The occupiers continue shelling Kherson. The occupiers this night inflicted a shelling using MLRS on Kherson. It was a massive shelling. At 6 o'clock in the morning there was yet another shelling, and the shelling was targeting the right bank of Kherson region, all the way from Stanislav, all the way across, all the way along the river bank, all the way to Kherson city. They were targeting the residential sector, they were targeting private houses, apartment blocks, infrastructure, and the bombardments are continue incessantly. Yesterday there was an aviation strike using the aviation bombs in Belozersky district. Aviation bombs were dropped on Berislav district, on the villages of Novoberislav, Kozatske, and the enemy also used UAVs to drop the bombs on Solovivka. The use of aviation is the latest tactics of the occupiers. They use the guided aviation bombs, which is quite powerful weapon. Each bomb weighs up to 500 kilograms, and as I was reported yesterday from Kozatske, it's a real terrible story, because when the bomb is falling while it's in the air, it makes a terrible sound, and people were on the distance of about 800 meters from the epicenter, and they said should have they been staying closer, they probably could have been dead. The shock wave is immense, and this is types of weapon that the enemy uses against our civilians. Mr. Serhii, do we know anything about any casualties during such which resulted from such strikes? Well, within last day the military administration reported about 7 people injured. 5 of them were hospitalized, 2 were provided emergency medical aid. Unfortunately, every day we have people getting injured as a result of such bombardments, and unfortunately we even have casualties. What is the dynamics with population in the region? Do people keep leaving the region, or are they coming back? What do you see? And for the time being, according to your assessment, what is the number of people staying in the region? Well, talking about the regional capital, and if we check the dynamics of the people who use the free evacuation services, at the beginning of this evacuation, about 50 to 60 people per day were using this service. Now this number exceeds 100 people. It's about 100-120 people living Kherson region on a free evacuation route on a daily basis. Staying in the city is quite dangerous, because you never know where will the next strike be targeted. And the same situation is with all the settlements along the bank of Dnipro. People keep leaving from those villages and towns, and such towns as Berislav and others. It's still too early to say about the people coming back there. People mostly come back to the settlements which are on a distance from the river bank, where the demining works were already accomplished, because it's one of the important components for return to normal life. And also the occupiers cannot reach those areas with the MLRS, and after all the demining works should be accomplished first for the people to start coming back to those villages and towns, and the people do so in the areas where those works were accomplished. The economy starts working there, people start working in their land plots, they start creating jobs again, and they obviously come back home because it's an important issue coming back to your home and to work on your land. Mr. Serhii, talking about the critical infrastructure, what is the information about its conditions? Are all the consumers provided with all the necessary utility services? Well, talking about the region, the works are still on the way to reconnect the settlements to the electric power supply. We have to understand that the enemy was leaving the infrastructure destroyed while leaving the right bank of Kherson region. Well, and starting from mobile communication, mobile internet, all the basic utility services were destroyed. The regional capital is fully supplied with the electric power, water supply, mobile internet, and cell networks are on. And only when the occupiers inflict strikes on the critical infrastructure, the operation of those services is suspended for a short period, but then it's being reestablished. I mean, both, well, water supply and water disposition and water treatment facilities all keep working with the support of international organizations who supply the generators to keep the services running. The international organizations also help us to keep our hospitals running 24/7. The works are underway, and talking about the regional capital and the settlements which were completely destroyed, and some of them like Potemkino or Posad Pokrovsky, those settlements were almost completely destroyed, but people keep coming back there. And in Posad Pokrovsky, with the help of international organizations, we had mobile bulletin delivered there, and people keep reconstructing their private houses there. Also, people are coming back to Potemkino. That's a small village which was completely destroyed because the front line was going through that village, but people tried to resume their lives there, and the same situation is happening in other settlements of the right bank area of Zaporizhia region. We keep reconnecting the utility services there and to resume their operation. Irina Mamchur, Ukrinform, I have a couple of questions. First of all, about the situation in the left bank. Do you have any information regarding the situation in the settlements under occupation? Is it a lot different? I mean, Gola Pristan, Leshki, Kakhovka, Genishevsk, Nova Kakhovka. Is it true that the occupiers offer to evacuate people from Skadovsk, for example? Well, the situation is really different. If we talk about the settlements located on the bank of Dnieper, the occupiers announced mandatory evacuation from there. They make up the lists of the people who should leave those areas, and in fact people are being deported. They are first promised to be evacuated to Krasnodarsky region, but they end up somewhere behind Ural. But the majority of people radically resist and they refuse to leave. This is why the occupiers increase pressure on such people. First, they impose the permits for movement across the settlements, so they exercise pressure for forced evacuation, and this is what's going on in Skadovsk. For example, what they announced was voluntary evacuation. It's not mandatory as in those settlements that you mentioned earlier. For the time being, the announcements of the occupier is for those who wish, they may use the services of evacuation to Russia. They try to persuade people with financial support and bulletin certificates in order to deport people to Russia, to those areas which are less populated and they don't have normal utility services. So for what I understand, it's yet another deportation of Ukrainians to Russia, to the sparsely populated areas of Russia. In Genishevsk, the situation is stable. In Genishevsk and Novotroitsk, they resort to pressure on local population. There's yet another wave of search for the representatives of resistance movement. They announced searches in Arabatska, Spit, Shaslivtsevo, Genishevsk itself. This is where the occupiers exercise screening activities. It's Novotroitsk, Nova Oleksiyevka, and Ilanivka, Nizhny Serogozhy. Those are the places where occupiers just locked down the villages for searches. Sometimes they switch off the mobile communication and lights to make sure that their material is being moved in a secure way. The occupiers announced about nationalization of agricultural businesses in the left bank of Kherson region. So what's going on with other agricultural businesses in the occupied territories, and what's going on with our businesses in the liberated areas already? Are there agricultural works already going on in the deoccupied areas? In the occupied territories, the occupiers press on the agrarians, on the agricultural businesses who remain in occupation. They press on them in terms of re-registration. Only those can operate who got themselves re-registered according to the Russian legislation. Part of such businesses really got registered, and they started spring sowing campaign. They started spring agricultural activities. The businesses that you mentioned, some of them are nationalized by the so-called new government. They are in fact expropriated from their real owners, and now they are those businesses which used to belong to the owners who refused to re-register. They start getting redistributed among the so-called new owner. As to the business in Kolyhaevo, there was a new structure who announced themselves as the successor of that business. So the clan of Saldo and Buluk, with the help of some of their goons, they started nationalizing, as they call it, but I would rather call it stolen by Saldo and Buluk in their favor. So it's a total pillaging and forcing of the businesses to get re-registered under Russian law. Do we have any additional information regarding Kolyhaev himself? Well, you know, I don't have any details. Sometimes there are people who report that they've seen Kolyhaev being held by Russians in detention somewhere in Chaplinka or Kalanchak in Ukrainian territory, but it's more like some gossips, and there is no official information regarding the whereabouts of Kolyhaev himself. But talking about the agrarians who are in the territory under control of Ukraine, the work has started only in those territories and which were demined. 50,000 hectares were already demined. 450,000 hectares of agricultural lands are still densely mined, and any works there are hazardous. Sometimes, unfortunately, people go in the areas which are not demined, and it results in some tragic cases. So we call everybody to fulfill any works only in demined territories. And first of all, only those territories are demined where the agrarians want to plant vegetables, because it creates a lot of jobs, and there is still a vast problem with irrigation, with supply of water to those areas. And we understand that growing vegetables is almost impossible without irrigation, and now we should consider the matter of support of agrarians with the sowing material, with the turnover funds and water supply. And again, I want to emphasize only for those who work in the demined areas. Mr. Serhii, maybe the last question regarding the temporarily occupied territories, the process of passportization by Russians. To what extent is this process intense? How intense is that process in that territories? Well, the pressure is being intensified because the occupiers were forcing collaborationists to expedite the passportization. It should have happened before the new year. In fact, the passportization which was announced by the occupiers, it failed, and that's why the collaborationists started intensifying their psychophancy, and people are being intimidated by the fact that they may get deprived of their property if they don't get Russian passports and don't get their property registered according to the Russian legislation, including their vehicles. The occupiers threaten people that they will confiscate the land plots and their people's vehicles and any other private property of the people who did not undergo re-registration and passportization. This is why the pressure is intensifying in terms of passportization, and those searches that I mentioned, the occupiers, they keep interrogating people. Why don't they receive Russian passports until now? The occupiers try to find out whether the Russian passport was not obtained due to some principal pro-Ukrainian position, and those people are being detained and imprisoned for such pro-Ukrainian position. Mr. Serhii, thank you very much for joining our broadcast. I'm reminding you, joining us was Deputy of Kherson Regional Council, Serhii Khlan. Our next briefing is in 10 minutes. We will be talking to Yuri Ignat, spokesperson of the Air Force Command of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. So bear with us, trust in the Armed Forces, and glory to Ukraine.